Weatherly Well Cave Incident. On February 11, 1998, four friends named James Lewis, Alan England, Darl Moore, and Jerry Olson went to explore a cave. The cave was called Weatherly Well, and Jerry had just found it during a recent walk. The cave had a very small entrance. It was only 9 inches wide, about as wide as a dinner plate. This tiny gap led down 4 feet before opening to an 11-foot drop, followed by another 10-foot drop. The four friends looked at the narrow entrance. It was wet and very tight. From above, they could see the first drop going down into darkness. The passage beyond twisted like a corkscrew with very little room. The friends checked all their gear carefully. They knew only one person could enter at a time. Alan England, who was 63 years old but still very fit, was the smallest in the group. He volunteered to go first. The team secured a rope above ground to help Alan climb back up later. Then Alan began to squeeze into the tiny entrance. He had to twist his body to fit through the narrow space. His clothes got wet from the damp walls as he struggled through. After pushing through the tight entrance, Alan dropped down into a slightly larger space. The rope helped him lower himself safely. He was now 7 feet below the surface. He could finally stretch a little after the tight squeeze. Alan saw another 10-foot drop below him. His headlamp showed more twisting passages going deeper into the cave, but Alan knew it would be too dangerous to go further alone. He decided to turn back. Climbing back up the first part was easy, but when Alan reached the narrow entrance slot, he ran into big trouble. What had been easy to slide down was now almost impossible to climb up. Alan looked up at the tight slot above him. He started to climb, using the rope for help, but when he reached the narrow part, he couldn't move any further. The tight space pressed against his body, and he couldn't squeeze through. He twisted and pulled, trying to force his body back through the opening. But the slot seemed even tighter than before. His wet clothes stuck to his skin, making it harder to move. James and Darl noticed Alan was struggling. They tried pulling on the rope to help him, but the space was too tight. Each pull seemed to wedge Alan further into the rock. Alan was getting tired, and his hands were shaking from cold and effort. The cave was very cold, and it was winter outside too. Alan's wet clothes made him even colder. He started shivering badly. The tight space was so narrow he could barely even take a deep breath. James and Jerry tried to help by lowering extra clothes and warm drinks to Alan. Alan drank the warm liquid, but he was still very cold and stuck. Finally, Alan called out that he couldn't do this anymore. They needed to get help right away. James and Jerry quickly hiked back to Jerry's house and called the East Tennessee Cave Rescue Team. Within 2 hours, the rescue team arrived. By then, Alan had been trapped for nearly 5 hours. He was pale and shaking from the cold. He kept thinking about how easily he had slipped down through the slot, but now he couldn't get back up. The rescuers were skilled cave explorers with special tools. They gave Alan more clothes and food to fight against the cold. Then they set up a special system of ropes and pulleys to try to get him out. The rescue was very slow and painful. Alan could feel the cold rock scraping against his chest and shoulders as they pulled. The rescuers worked very carefully to avoid hurting him. After an hour of hard work, Alan finally came out of the tight slot. He was bruised but alive. The cold air outside felt good compared to the cave. Even though he was exhausted and cold, Alan wanted to walk back to the car by himself. Boy Scout Cave Incident. On December 27, 2003, 8 boys from the San Antonio Boy Village went to explore Boy Scout Cave in Florida. 2 counselors went with them but stayed outside the cave. 2 of the boys were Michael Shiro, 15, and Javek Henderson, 16. They were excited to explore the deep, twisting cave. The counselors didn't go inside because they thought they were too big for the narrow spaces. Boy Scout Cave had many narrow tunnels and sharp turns. Most people thought it was safe because it wasn't wet and the walls didn't fall down. The temperature inside was 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cooler than outside but not freezing. One of the counselors made a campfire near the cave entrance to stay warm. This would cause problems later. Michael and Henderson led the group into the cave. As they went deeper, it got very dark and quiet. The boys had to crawl and twist through tight passages. After about an hour, they came to a very hard part of the cave called the hairpin curve. This was a very narrow tunnel that made a sharp turn like a hairpin. The boys couldn't see what was around the corner. Michael went through first and Henderson followed, close behind. Suddenly, Henderson got stuck. He couldn't move forward or backward. His body was twisted in the tight space. Michael tried to help free his friend. The rest of the boys waited nervously in a wider part of the tunnel. Michael pushed and pulled, trying to get Henderson out. After trying for an hour to free Henderson, Michael got very tired. Even though the cave wasn't very cold, lying against the cool rock for so long made both boys lose body heat. Henderson was still stuck and he could only shout for help. The other boys started to panic. Some thought the campfire outside was using up all the oxygen in the cave, though this wasn't really happening. They were all scared. The boys had to make a hard choice. They couldn't free Michael and Henderson by themselves. They decided to leave their friends behind and go get help. When they reached the entrance, they told the counselors what happened. The counselors quickly put out the fire and called 911. Rescue teams arrived within an hour. They were experienced cave explorers who knew what to do. They brought special tools, including harnesses and chisels. When the rescuers reached the hairpin curve, they found a scary scene. Henderson was still awake but shaking and cold. Michael was unconscious. Both boys were showing signs of hypothermia, when your body gets too cold. The rescuers used chisels to make the narrow passage wider. It took over an hour to free Henderson. They wrapped him in a warm blanket and started moving him toward the entrance. Then they worked on freeing Michael. This was even harder because he couldn't help. After nearly 2 hours of chiseling, they finally got him out. His body was cold, and his pulse was weak, but he was alive. The rescue team carefully carried both boys out of the cave. Ambulances were waiting to take them to the hospital. Both boys had hypothermia but survived. Michael took a whole day to wake up. Real well cave incident. In March 1997, two friends named Andrew and Attila planned a cave adventure. They were excited to explore Real Well, a deep cave in Tennessee. The cave had a big 160-foot pit at its entrance. Andrew was 32 years old and had been in many caves before. Attila was 26 and had only visited 5 caves. They thought they were ready for this challenge. On March 18th, they arrived at the cave. It was a rainy day. They could hear water rushing into the cave entrance. They had wetsuits in their car, special clothes to keep warm in water, but they decided not to wear them. This was their first big mistake. Attila also forgot to bring a helmet. This was another mistake, but they were so excited that they didn't think about safety enough. Andrew went down the rope first. He felt cold water hitting his back as he slid down into the pit. By the time he reached the bottom, he was very cold and wet. Attila followed, and the water hit him even harder. Their headlamps showed beautiful cave walls, but the cold was already hurting them. After only 30 minutes of exploring, Attila started shaking from the cold. "Andrew, I can't stay down here," Attila said. "I think I need to get out." Andrew agreed. "All right, I'll get the ropes ready," he said. The waterfall was loud. Attila set up his climbing gear too quickly. He used the wrong kind of clips. Andrew noticed something was wrong with Attila's setup, but before he could say anything, Attila had already started climbing. Each move was hard because of the freezing water pouring over him. His gear was slippery and not working right. Halfway up, Attila stopped climbing. His muscles hurt, and he was very cold. Part of his gear had come loose, and he couldn't reach it to fix it. He tried to tell Andrew what was happening, but the waterfall was too loud. "Attila, come back down if you need to," Andrew shouted from below. Attila tried to answer, but Andrew could barely hear him. Finally, Andrew heard him call out, "I can't!" Andrew knew he had to help his friend. He started climbing up the rope toward Attila. It was very hard. The water was freezing, and his hands went numb. When Andrew reached Attila, things looked bad. Attila was hanging in his harness, awake but unable to move. His body was getting too cold. This is called hypothermia. He was shaking, his skin was pale, and he seemed very tired. Andrew tried to attach Attila to his own harness so they could go down together. But with the water pouring down and both of them so cold, it was too difficult. Then Andrew tried to climb out while pulling Attila with him. But after going up only 15 feet, Andrew was too tired to continue. Now both friends were stuck in the freezing waterfall. Andrew knew they were in serious trouble. Attila was getting worse, and Andrew was also very cold. In one last effort, Andrew swung over to a small ledge on the cave wall. He managed to pull himself onto it and unhook from the rope. He was so cold and tired that he passed out. When Andrew woke up hours later, he saw that Attila was still hanging in the waterfall but wasn't moving. With great sadness, Andrew realized his friend had died. With shaking hands, Andrew set up his gear again. He had to cut the rope connecting him to Attila. Then he made the difficult climb out of the cave alone. When he reached the surface, he collapsed and called for help. Rescue teams came hours later and found Attila. The doctor said he had died from hypothermia. His body got too cold.